The 2019 Geneva International Motor Show was held at Pal Expo, a sort of Cobo Hall attached to the airport. 6 halls full of new makes and models. At times it was a bit overwhelming. Where should I go first? How much time should I spend at each stand? But I will say that the Pal Expo on the whole is a really good venue for a motor show. All the signage is up very high and you could see from one end to the other without much difficulty. Although I must point out, if you're going to come to this show, you need to drink plenty of water and wear comfy shoes. I can't show everything that there was at the Geneva Motor Show, but I would like to point out the top 5 most significant cars in my opinion that were there, starting with number 5, the Renault Clio. That's my old boss, Lawrence Vandenacker, behind the wheel, and he was kind enough to spend some time with me after this unveil to talk about the car's finer points. Outside, the car has got beautiful proportions and forms, and a higher level of detail than you might expect for a car at this price point. Lawrence readily admits that the car has stiff competition, and it's important that they get this one right. On the inside, the car makes no bones about the fact that it's inexpensive, but that doesn't mean that there's a lack of consideration for the occupants. There's a stand-up screen with toggles directly below it that's very intuitive to use. And there's nice detailing too, like this anodized trim that runs through the vent and along the entire instrument panel. The trim is repeated elsewhere in the car. Lawrence described this car as a jewel that you want to treat with respect, and given the care that's put into it, I definitely see his point. Another small French car comes in at number 4, and this is the Peugeot 208. Seeing as Peugeot is coming back to the United States at some point, I think it's important to have a good look at this car. The outside is an interesting mix of sculpture and high-tech detailing, which is a formula that might help set them apart when they come back to the States. But the inside is where things really look different from the norm. A 2-tiered approach with freestanding screens and an emphasis on negative spaces, toggle switches, intricate detailing. It almost has a science fiction edge to it. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it reminds me of Blade Runner 2049, but that was an interior that had a lot of freestanding and technical details as well. I'll say it one more time, if they're going to come back to the States, they need to differentiate themselves, and this kind of look might just do the trick. Moving on to my third choice, a concept car from Audi, the Q4 e-tron. High-tech light show aside, this unveil is important because it shows how Audi's aesthetic is going to be tailored towards the electrification trend. Details are going to be a huge part of that, but they're very well blended into the overall form with this vehicle. The instrument panel was of particular interest to me because there were a lot of unique choices made with regard to how to integrate all these components. For example, the LED lighting that runs around the registers and slips behind the center stack screen. The screen itself is part of an A-gloss black L-shaped form that sits atop the IP. It's an interesting solution that's a little different from the freestanding screens that everybody else seems to be doing. My number 2 choice is the Nissan IMQ, a vehicle that looks like it was crafted by a jeweler as opposed to a car designer. The outside is dominated by sheer, sharp forms that are completely uncompromising. I have to say, in some cases, I think they went a little bit overboard. But thankfully, there's a little more humanity inside the car to go along with the high-tech aesthetic. And once again, there's a unique way of integrating the screen with the overall instrument panel, this time much more organic in nature. I have to say, I'm really impressed with the variety of interior themes at this show. For my number 1 choice, I'll hand it over to the Aston Martin CEO.
Please welcome Marek Reichman and Nikki Rimington, our newly appointed Vice President and Chief Planning Officer, to reveal the future of large luxury mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lagonda all-terrain concept. Why launch Lagonda with an SUV? Very simple. The two biggest growth factors in our market over the coming decade will be SUVs and electrification. And since Lagonda respects but is not bound by the past, we're free to define the brand on our terms. Think of Lagonda as a 120-year-old startup tech company. We asked our designers to put traditional thinking aside and take full advantage of the design opportunities that become available when you no longer need to provide space in the front of the vehicle for a large power source. The Lagonda all-terrain concept will be a sanctuary for its occupants. Like a sculpture on wheels, it will feel more like a luxury private jet than a car. A magical space-inspired SUV that will not be constrained by convention.
So there you have it, my top 5 picks for the most significant cars at the 2019 Geneva Motor Show. If you go over to Facebook and Instagram, you'll find more content from the show to peruse and take note of.